In this tutorial, we will be making a weapon wheel. There are a lot of different types of weapon wheels to choose from, but I will take inspiration from the GTA 5 weapon wheel. I will be using a third-person template to start from. There's a lot of things to do, so let's get right to it. In order to design the weapon wheel, to simplify the process, find a picture of a weapon wheel you want to create and copy it. Open up PaintNet or any other paint software and create a new canvas by a PC screen resolution, so 1920 by 1080. Create a new layer and paste it. I will create the weapon wheel in the middle and with 8 slots, but if you have other preferences like having less slots or wanting the weapon wheel in a corner, just repeat the steps I do, but with your settings. I have an Align plugin that centers the images for me, so if you want that, you can download it from the description below. Create another layer and draw over the weapon wheel. Again, you can do things exactly as you like. Make sure that the edges look good. Once you have done one slot, create a new layer and move on to the next one. They are not 100% evenly placed, but I'm okay with this since designing is not my forte. Repeat this process until you've done all the slots. Once you're done, select the slot and hide everything else. Then, fill the slot and save the image as a PNG. Call it slot 1. Merge all the layers to save and Ctrl-Z to undo. Do this with all 8 slots. Place every image inside of Unreal. These images will be the unselected version of the slots. Create a new widget and place a canvas panel. Inside your character blueprint, choose an input to enable the weapon wheel. If you want to hold the button in for the wheel to stay, you can remove the widget unreleased. I won't connect this now for testing purposes. If you want to press, you can use a flip-flop instead. Let's start off by designing the widget. Add an image and set it to be slot 1. In order to find the correct scale, instead of manually trying to guess, a good trick you can use is to set the image to be the canvas size we made it in. In this case, 1920 by 1080. And if you want it to be smaller, you can divide both values by 2. Bigger, multiply. Place the slot where you'd like it to be. I will be using the top middle anchor. Duplicate and set it to be the next slot. Set its location to be the exact same as the other image. Repeat this with the rest of the slots. Before we move on to the rest, let's set the render opacity to around 0.3. So it kind of looks like this. Now I'll have something like this. If you want to add life, you can make each slot move when being selected. To do that, we need to create an animation for each slot. Select the slot you want to animate and open the animation tab. Press the plus. Then press Add. Select the slot image you selected earlier, plus Transform, Translation. To create the animation, move the animation to how long you want the animation to take, and set the X or Y value depending on the angle to create a moving animation. To test the slot on Construct, get a Play Animation node and connect it. Now let's add an animation to every slot. The exact same process. Select the slot image you want to animate and create a new animation. When setting the animation, since this slot is at an angle, we need to add to X and Y. Just try and see whether you need positive or negative values, or use the same settings as I do. So when we deselect the slot, instead of creating a new animation for it to go backwards, we can just reverse this one. There's two ways that we can create the weapon wheel mouse selection system. The reason I'm showing you two ways is because both have their benefits and disadvantages. Method 1 is better if you have less slots than 8 and also works for a controller, but I kind of feel like you don't get enough control. That's why I personally prefer Method 2. Method 2 is a more accurate way to be able to select the weapons. Method 2 allows you to kind of choose where to move the mouse in order to select the weapon. I recommend trying both methods and seeing what works best for you. I want to start by creating Method 1. In order to demonstrate how it'll work, we can use an image of a red line. We're going to use this to set the correct rotation, and based on that, we can select a weapon. Add an image of a red line and set it in the center of the widget. We're going to change the line later on, so don't worry too much about the location and stuff. On Event Construct, using Player Controller as reference, set Show Mouse Cursor to be true. When we move the mouse around, we're controlling our character's camera. Create a Boolean variable that checks whether our weapon wheel is enabled, and connect it like this. Set it to be true when creating the weapon wheel, and false when we remove it. Copy the camera input action from your character class. By default, this is included with the third-person template, but if you don't have this, you can either create it or use the mouse X and Y instead. Using the red line as reference, drag out a set render transform angle. Since the mouse movement on X and Y will return a value from 0 to 1, we need to convert these values into degrees. To achieve this, we can use the Atone To node, and this is important. Connect the X to the Y and the Y to the X. Don't know why, but this works much better. We're going to have to do a bunch of equations to get the right number. So since the Atone node only gives us a value from 0 to 180, we're going to have to add 180 to make it 360. Then we're going to multiply it with -1. This is a formula that can convert positive values into negative and negative values into positive. After that, divide 360 by how many slots you have. So in this case, 8. That will give us the value 45. Then, round this number and multiply that number by 45 and connect to the angle. So this whole process essentially rounds up to the nearest angle and sets the value directly to the angle. If you were using 4 slots instead, you would divide 360 by 4 and you would multiply and divide by 90 instead. Let's add a print node to see the angle number. As you can see, we will get a degree based on our angle. The values are negative, but that doesn't matter. The red line isn't rotating correctly. This is because the image isn't relative to the screen. To create a red line correctly, add one in the center using the 1920 by 1080 canvas like before. Save it as a PNG with the same resolution. Now when we play, you'll see the red line correctly representing our selected slot based on the mouse movement. It jitters a lot, so we'll have to fix that. But first, let's create an event for every slot. Instead of creating an event for selecting and unselecting, we can just use a bool input to decide whether the slot should be selected or unselected. Play animation on true. Play animation reverse on false. Create one for every slot and make sure to select the correct animation. Based on the angle, we can set which slot we want to be selected. I already know the values that we need, but if you're using more or less than 8 slots, you can just get the numbers by pointing the red line at the angle and seeing what number comes up. Then we need to add an event for resetting each slot. Add 8 Boolean values, one for each slot. The way this is going to work, we call this event every time we select a slot so that we can deselect our previous slot. Instead of tracking which slots are activated and need to be deactivated, we can just deactivate all at once. Add a sequence with 9 outputs. Connect a branch to each bool in order. Add a doOnce node that starts closed. This is because we don't want to deactivate a slot that hasn't first been activated. Call the slot event, but leave the boolean unchecked. Add a sequence to the end. Let's go back to our angle check code. Slot 1, or technically 0 degrees, equals minus 360. Add a doOnce node and check the boolean. Call the reset event and check every value except for slot 1. Connect the end to reset the slot 1 reset. We do it like this so that slot 1 can't be unselected before it has been selected first. Connect one output of the sequence to reset the doOnce here. This is to make sure that it can't be selected before it has been unselected. For slot 2, the number to check for is 360 minus 45, so minus 315. Now repeat the steps that we did for slot 1. Here, we check every slot except for slot 2. It works, but the system is too sensitive for a mouse movement. Add a new boolean and call it something like slot selected. This will be used to reduce the flickering. Set it to be true on the last output of the reset slot event, and after a small delay, disable it. Go to the mouse movement input and check whether X or Y has moved more than something like 0.14. The higher this value is, the more you have to move a mouse to select a weapon. Be sure to add negative values as well, or you could use an absolute node. Then, add another branch and connect the slot selected boolean. Let's add the rest of the slots. Just repeat the steps and set the numbers. Now it works great. We can change the delay to get faster selecting, but it will add more flickering. If we hide the mouse cursor, we can try out the weapon wheel. So this is the first way of controlling the weapon wheel. This method also allows you to use a controller joystick to steer the wheel. I feel like it's a bit jittery and sometimes it can be hard to select the correct slot. But maybe it's just me and maybe it does actually work well. But anyhow, this brings us to method number 2. It's a bit of a different approach, but gives you a little bit more control of where to move the mouse to get the desired slot. We're going to use buttons, and a slot will be selected based on the button we're hovering over. Add a button. Remember to use the same anchor as before. How you place these buttons depends on your desired range of motion. However, I would recommend starting off with my values and going from there. Set the scale and location and duplicate the button until you've done all of them. So the idea is to reach a slot from the middle using the mouse cursor. Set input mode to game and UI. Then set the mouse cursor location to be in the middle of your screen. To get the middle of your screen, regardless of screen size, we can get the viewport size and divide by 2. So we'll select like this and teleport the mouse cursor back to the middle. Add a hover event for all the buttons. Add a sequence and the same nodes as we did before. We're going to connect the reset slot the same as well. Let's move it closer. Connect the end to the do once reset from both sides and repeat for all 8 buttons. Copy the set mouse position and connect from all sequence outputs, so every time the button is touched, the mouse goes back to the middle. Add a tick and a delay, and set the mouse cursor to the middle after a small delay. The smaller this value is, the more you have to move your mouse to select a weapon. So this is what it'll look like behind the scenes. Let's hide the mouse cursor and the buttons by setting the render opacity to 0. Don't set them to be hidden in the visibility section, since we won't be able to interact with them. We don't need the red line for method 2, so we can hide that as well. Like I said before, I recommend trying both methods to see what you like best. I personally prefer method 2, however, any of the steps related to the rest of the weapon wheel will not depend on what method you're using. Feel free to change the size, positions, or the Z order of the buttons. Now we can add a color for when the slot is selected. Go back to the Paint software and fill with a color, or any other style that you want your slot to look like, and save using the same process as before. Drag the files into Unreal. Go back to the slot selected events. Drag out the slot 1 image and get Set Brush from Texture. If you want the slot to have more opacity, you can also set the render opacity to something like 0.6 when selected. Select slot 1 colored image. On false, set the opacity back to 0.3 and the texture to the default slot 1. Repeat this for all 8 slots. You could also add a different color to each slot, or more colors on the sides, but I will leave the creative designing to you. By the way, if you're using method 1, you might encounter this issue. To fix it, we're going to replace this node with a custom event and call it from our character instead. Promote the widget to a reference and use an isValid node to prevent errors. If you want to switch from the methods, make sure to disconnect the set input mode and the tick. Just restart the project and the error will disappear. I am using method 2, so I'm going to disconnect the event. Now let's add a weapon to the wheel. Find or create a picture of your weapon and add it to Unreal. You can paste it in Paint to set the resolution. Some games have the weapons inside the slot, and others allow the weapon to be a little outside. And to save on size, you can create a new canvas with the resolution of the weapon and export it to Unreal like that. Add an image and set it to be your weapon. There's 2 ways you can create the wheel. One way is if you know exactly where each weapon is going to be. like in GTA for example. The second way is if you want it to be random, depending on what weapon you pick up in your game first. This way is more complicated, as you will have to add the image, ammo, and every other design related to the weapon to each slot. So I will create my wheel in a way where the weapons end up in their corresponding slot. Place the image where you want it to be, and remember the correct anchor. If you want ammo to display below, make sure to leave some space. We will also need to add an animation to this image the same way we did before. Make sure you set the same animation properties to the weapon image as you did with the slot. Add the play and reverse animation in the correct slot. To add ammo, place a text under the weapon. Set the size, color, etc. I also recommend setting the text from the middle. To set the ammo correctly, you will need to get your ammo variable. This will depend on your own weapon system. I will create a basic system later using our character, since it's very easy to cast your character and doesn't cost much on performance. Create the ammo variable and set it to an integer. You can also set a test value. When the widget constructs, or widget begin play as I like to call it, set the text to be the variable we created by casting to the character. Also, remember to create an animation for the ammo text and to play and reverse in the slot, like we did with the weapon image. Let's also add a blur behind the weapon wheel. Anchor it to full screen. Set the Z order to below any other thing in the widget. When you create the widget, make sure to add a do once to prevent two weapon wheels from spawning at once. We can also add slow motion by setting the global time dilation. Make sure to set it back to 1 when closing the wheel. You can also add a weapon name text. To set the weapon name, set text to be the weapon name in the given slot. create an integer called selected weapon. You can also add arrows to further stylize the weapon wheel. Add an arrow image to each slot. Set the arrows to be hidden. Set the correct arrow based on the slot to be visible when selected and hidden when unselecting. You can also add an outline for the text in the wheel. Set the selected weapon in each slot. So slot 1 equals selected weapon 1, slot 2, 2, and so on. You can also add ammo types based on what weapon is selected. We can give the weapon wheel blur a color as well by adding a border and again setting it behind everything with the Z order. Give it a color and reduce the opacity. You get the idea now, so I'll leave the rest of the designing to you. The mouse can sometimes escape the buttons and get out of the screen and mess up the method 2 selection system. To prevent this, we can add some buttons cornering the weapon wheel and on hover, set the mouse location back to the center. This doesn't have to be accurate, just make sure there's no space for the mouse to escape. Much better. Set the render opacity of the buttons to 0. We have to change input mode back to game when we're done with the wheel. If you're using method 1, you don't need to do this. If we somehow click the buttons with the mouse clicks, the widget will close. To prevent this, change the is focusable to false for all the buttons, including the cornered buttons. We have a similar problem with method 1, where mouse clicking will change the input mode. To prevent this, Set input mode using the tick. Now let's spawn the weapons that we select from the weapon wheel. Again, you could create your own system for this, but I will show you a basic way to do it. If you rotate the image, it will be harder to scale. Create a blueprint class for the weapon. Add the weapon mesh and disable collision. Design the weapon however you like. Go into your character. We're going to create a ghost mesh that will remember the correct location for our weapon. This is an easier way to set the correct location of the weapon, but feel free to use sockets instead. Select the mesh and add a sphere. Make sure the location is set to 0. Then, while the sphere is selected, add another mesh and set it to be your weapon. Make sure it spawns in the same location as the sphere. Call the sphere something like weapon name location. Set the weapon socket to be in the right hand or wherever you want it to be. Select the sphere and remove the mesh. I recommend setting your character to be in an aiming animation for easier placement of the weapon. To set the weapon location, select the mesh that was previously a sphere, not the weapon mesh, and place or rotate to your needs. To test, cast your character from the weapon blueprint and attach the actor to the ghost mesh or previous sphere. Set the enum values to snap to target. Delete the weapon mesh or hide it so that you can relocate the location if needed. Place the weapon in your world to test. It works, but it's a bit small. To adjust the size, either scale the ghost mesh or scale the mesh in your blueprint class. Either way works fine. Repeat the steps for your other weapons. If you add a mesh and it's not in the center, delete the sphere and try again. I'm going to add a shotgun weapon quickly here as well. This shotgun is not a mesh, but a skeletal mesh. Some weapons will be in this format for more flexibility. The process is exactly the same, so don't worry about it. You can also customize the color of any image if it's not black or white. Red also gives us limited coloring options. I'm just going to organize things a little better. Now we need to be able to pick up weapons and select them from the weapon wheel. Optionally, we're also going to create a drop weapon option. Create a slot enabled boolean for every slot. Slot 1 enabled, slot 2 enabled, all the way. Go into the widget and do the same thing. Set the slot booleans in the widget to be the slot variables from our character. Create an event and connect to the reset slot due once close node. Do this for all of them. Set your weapon images to be hidden. Remember to hide the ammo and everything else you might have related to each slot. Go to slot 1 and check whether slot 1 is enabled. On false, check whether it's selected. Here you can choose whether you want an empty slot to play the animation or not, or to be selected with a color or something else. Also set the text to be empty. Set selected weapon to be 0. On false, unselect the empty slot. You guessed it, repeat for the rest of the slots. Now we need to check what slots are enabled to set the weapon images visible or not. Since I only have a couple of slots filled, I'll skip the check for the other slots to prevent error. Now we'll have no weapon enabled, but if we enable any of the slots, they will be. I'm going to leave slot 1 enabled and slot 3 disabled for testing purposes. Create an actor variable. This will represent our current weapon actor and will be used to delete the weapon. Create a selected weapon integer here as well. Add a sequence after is valid. Make sure you connect the remove to the second and not the first output. Add a branch and check whether the selected weapon in the widget equals the selected weapon of our character. Create a destroy weapon event and connect like me. Connect the switch on int to spawn the correct weapon based on the number. We don't need to set location or anything, just split the transform to avoid error. You can either use begin play or a custom event for the weapons. If you're using begin play, you don't need to call anything here. Check if slot 1 is enabled before spawning a weapon. Here you can also play an animation or switch stance. Set the actor variable to be the new weapon class. Set the switch on int to be the widget selected weapon. Now let's pick up a weapon. Duplicate your weapon class and remove all code. Add a collision and set the collision response to ignore. If you want your weapon to rotate or to add physics, you can watch my other video on that. After 1 second, set collision response to overlap. We do it like this just in case the weapon spawns near our character, so we don't pick it up right away. On overlap, we need to enable the slot add a custom event connected like this, and call the event from the other class. To prevent two weapons at once, we need to destroy our current weapon every time we select a new weapon. Another cool thing we can do is to select our currently selected weapon when we open the wheel. To do that, add a sequence in our widget construct and call the right slot event. Now when I open the widget, it selects the currently selected weapon. This step is optional, but if you want your weapon to be visible while the weapon wheel is active, we can do that as well. Go back to the weapon spawn code and add the following nodes. Select every slot. Do the same for every slot. We also have to set the weapons visible when the slot is enabled in the widget. I don't think I have to say do this for every slot anymore. Remember to add ammo and other stuff as well. If you want to be able to drop your weapon, add some text below. Set the text to be visible when a filled slot is selected after a small delay. Set the text to be hidden when an empty slot is selected. If we select an empty slot, our weapon will disappear. To fix this, check for 0. To drop the weapon, choose an input And if you only want to be able to drop your weapon when the weapon wheel is active, connect down is valid. Check whether there is a weapon to drop. Remove the currently equipped weapon and spawn the pickable weapon class. Set slot enabled to false. The slot animation is still selected. We have to unselect it before disabling it. Reset everything to the way your character is unarmed. On each slot. So now we have a weapon wheel where we can pick up, drop, and select weapons. You can also play a sound when selecting a slot. If you want to animate the whole widget, instead of adding an animation to everything in here, we can add an animation for the canvas panel. Move the timeline first and press the keyframe button, then go to 0 and change whatever you want. Since the blur will also be affected, we can separately animate in the blur. Either you can set them visible when the animation is finished, or you can animate the blur properly. To reverse the animation when closing, we can create an event, and after a delay, close the wheel.